is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Adele Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Well, China says it's open to dialogue with the U.S. as incoming President Donald Trump pledges an extra 10% tariff on Chinese goods to stop the flow of illegal drugs into America. The importance of bilateral cooperation amid international uncertainty highlighted at a meeting in Beijing between Singapore Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong and China's President Xi Jinping. The Philippines' top intelligence agency says it has concluded that illegal and malign foreign influence by China extends far beyond a single sector, infiltrating the entire country. And China's Huawei advancing its comeback in premium smartphones, launching its Mate 70 series with a fully homegrown operating system as the tech giant grows despite heavy U.S. sanctions. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, a rescue service in Beijing where time is of the essence. See the challenges volunteers face as they attempt to locate missing elderly or suffering from dementia. Well, the concerns associated with Donald Trump's second term in the office have begun to unravel. Well, he's pledged a 25% tariff on all products from Mexico and Canada from his first day in office, and an additional 10% tariff on goods from China. Well, Olivia Mazuki has all the details of what has been announced and reaction as well from the targeted countries. What do you have for us, Liv?
Well, reaction is the right word. We have been seeing moves today. It appears to be the start of that higher tariff regime that Trump has promised. Mexico and Canada are in the firing line over concerns of illegal immigration and the trade of illicit drugs, while Trump has accused China of not making good on its promise to prevent fentanyl from coming into the country. China is indeed a major supplier of that chemical needed to make the drug. Now, Beijing has responded in its own defense, saying that China has always supported the U.S. in addressing fentanyl challenges and that it is willing to continue its anti-drug cooperation with Washington on the basis of equality, mutual benefit, and respect. The U.S. has long been critical of China that it's not doing enough to regulate its chemicals sector. It is also no secret that Trump intends to end China's most favored nation trading status. He wants to slap tariffs on Chinese imports in excess of 60%, much higher than the imposed during his first term. Mexico, China, and Canada are the nation's top three suppliers of imported goods. They accounted for about 42% of imports to the U.S. this year through September. Canada and Mexico send about 80% of their exports to the U.S., and an across-the-board tariff would definitely hurt their economies. The Chinese economy itself is in a much more vulnerable position given the country's prolonged property downturn, debt risks, and weak domestic demand. And the Canadian dollar fell to a four-year low on the news. Meanwhile, the Mexican peso traded to closest to its weakest since 2022. Chinese yuan edging lower offshore, and the broader China markets ended the day weaker, even though markets were anticipating Trump's move. Shanghai and Shenzhen closing in the red, about 0.8% for Shenzhen, and Hang Seng is flat. But investors are now hoping that higher tariffs may prompt stronger stimulus from Beijing. And for more insights into the tariff threats and the possible impact it may bring, we'll be speaking later with He Wai-Tang. He is professor of economics and also director of the Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong. That's all from me right now. I'll be back with more later, Oteli.
Thanks very much. Looking forward to that, Olivia. Well, Singapore Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong says that cooperation between Singapore and China is especially valuable amid a more uncertain and troubled international environment. SM Lee has just met Chinese President Xi Jinping a short while ago, and the two leaders were at the Diaoyutai State Guest House in Beijing. This comes as part of a 6-day visit to China, which began on Sunday. And we'll have more from our Beijing correspondent Olivia Xiong a little later in the bulletin. Well, in other news, the Philippines National Intelligence Coordinating Agency confirmed today that China had been illegally interfering with the Philippines, and not just at offshore gaming operators, but across almost the entirety of the country. And for more, we are joined now by CNA's Buena Banal in Metro Manila. Buena, what is the Philippines intelligence saying about Beijing's alleged interference in the country?
Two things were officially confirmed by the Philippines Intelligence Gathering and Analysis Arm in Tuesday's Senate hearing. Number one is the pervasive extent of malign influence and foreign interference activities in the Philippines. And number two is the existence of so-called advanced persistent threat groups, or APTs. These pertain to cyber security threats that are either targeting or are operating in the Philippines. So on number one, the Deputy Director General of the National Intelligence Coordinating Agency, Mr. Francisco Asidillo, said that there has been continuous monitoring in its 17 regional offices. And while the details he revealed during that Senate hearing is scant, he did disclose that the extent of this malign influence and foreign interference activities, which is a term that he used, is quote-unquote pervasive, adding that it exists in almost or in all the regions of the Philippines. Now, as to whether there are Philippine government officials or employees involved in such activities, the agency representative said that the agency still cannot make a determination of that. Now, on number two, on cybersecurity threats, the agency representative said that they have monitored the existence of advanced, persistent threat groups in the Philippines. Again, he explained that in the cybersecurity sector, APTs refer to a polite way of referring to state-backed, state-affiliated, or state-sponsored advanced hacking groups. And he explained that the reason why they call it APT is to differentiate it from normal individual hackers or non-sophisticated ones. In that, he said that the difference is in terms of three things. Number one is the skill level, number two is the personnel, and number three is the resources. So much so, he explained that they are believed to be largely state-trained, state-sponsored, or state-backed. Now, as to the aim of these so-called APTs, or advanced persistent threat groups, the agency representative also explained, and I quote, "They provide a convenient cutout for certain countries, which we call revisionist countries, that seek to upend the international global order." He said that their aim is to achieve certain asymmetric advantages and still provide a convenient denial or plausible deniability of links to certain states. Now, Mr. Asidillo also added that the POGO hubs in the Philippines, these are the online casinos catering to a foreign market that have since been ordered banned by President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., can have dual use, in that these hubs can sponsor scamming operations, as many know, but it can also be used for Chinese disinformation campaigns, although he said that this is just a possibility that the state or the Philippines cannot discount at this point. He was speaking to that Senate hearing that was looking into the crimes linked to these Philippine offshore gaming operators, or POGOs, one of which raided in Bamban Municipality, Tarlac Province in northern Philippines, whose sitting mayor at the time of the raid was actually a Chinese national named Go Waping, alias Alice Go, who turned out to secure birth certificate documents from a fake government document mill in southern Philippines and able to secure that mayoralty post despite her Filipino identity now in question.
Many thanks for that report. CNA's Buena Banal live from Metro Manila. Well, time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Xiaomi joins a growing number of Chinese tech majors investing in semiconductors to be more self-sufficient. And later, Japan's service sector inflation edges up in October, making the case for another near-term interest rate hike at the Bank of Japan. Hello again. It is time to get you up to speed in our business news, and Olivia Mazuki is standing by, ready to go. Liv, so it's all about Trump's tariff threats again making headlines in the markets?
That's right, Oteli. He said the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff. That is exactly what the president-elect said last month. So even as the move comes as no surprise, markets are still bracing for impact. Now, most emerging market stocks nursing a decline today, with the Mexican peso nearing its multi-year low. Chinese yuan and the Canadian dollar also retreated after the USD rallied following Donald Trump's pledge to slap big tariffs on America's biggest trading partners. The move would appear to violate a free trade deal. Trump says it will be in retaliation for illegal immigration and crime, and also drugs coming across the border. The news is fueling jitters over a potential global trade war. To help us make sense of Donald Trump's latest tariff threats, we have with us He Tang. He is economics professor and director of Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong. Thanks for coming on the show. Hey, let's start with the tariff threats. These are nothing new for Trump, but what can be said about the timing of it? Why now?
Well, I'm not surprised that Trump announced that he's going to increase tariffs on the first day when he is in the White House on China. Is actually consistent with my expectation that he's going to do it gradually on China. During the election campaign, he has repeatedly said that, when he gets elected, he will increase tariffs on Chinese products to 60%. I never believed that he's going to do it on day one. He's going to do it gradually in order to increase his bargaining power with the Chinese government. A little bit surprising to me is that, he's going to do it on Canada and Mexico on the first day as well. And here we are talking about 25% on goods coming from Mexico. Don't forget that, during the US-China trade war, the Chinese companies have been trying to export indirectly to the US through countries like Mexico. So putting tariffs on Mexico essentially is shutting down more channels through which goods from developing countries can now enter the US.
Well, China has issued a stark warning saying that no one will win a trade war. Do you agree with that in relations to Mexico and Canada as well? How likely would it actually help Trump meet his America First agenda?
Well, tariffs obviously are inefficient because it will increase cost of production and also prices of goods. But the U.S. is actually not that dependent on imports, right? If you look at the imports share in the U.S. GDP, it's only around 14 to 15%. If you look at the three countries that he announced that he's going to impose tariffs, those three countries together contribute around 1.5 trillion exports in 2023, which is around 35 to 36% of total U.S. import. So even though he's going to put tariffs on these countries, the impact on inflation is there, but it's not going to be something that he cannot control.
All right, I'd like to bring your attention now to Phase 1 trade deal signed in 2020. If history is any guide, how effective has it been in resolving that thorny U.S.-China relation?
Well, the U.S.-China relationship has been deteriorating for a while already. The relationship is not improving. The trade war is only the first set of tactics that the U.S. government has used. Don't forget that now we have technology war, we have sanctions and export controls, everything. So we have to separate the discussion about the U.S.-China trade war and now the U.S.-Mexico and the U.S.-Canada trade war. Trump is very transparent. He said the reason why he imposed tariffs on his neighbors is because he doesn't want to see all these illegal immigrants coming from Mexico in particular, and also all this illegal trade, in particular drug trade, that is getting into the U.S. In my opinion, there will be more possibility for Mexico and U.S. to strike a trade deal because Mexico is a much smaller economy as compared to China.
Let's zoom in on U.S. economy for a bit. We know inflation is coming down, but it's still above target set by the Fed. To what extent will these new additional tariffs actually cause more price pressure ahead at home and abroad?
It would certainly increase the inflation pressure in the U.S. In addition to tariffs, Trump also will propose tax cuts and also a series of fiscal stimulus measures. So I think in 2025, we're going to see inflation back in the U.S. But how much inflation is coming from tariffs? I think we have to watch. In the short run, certainly quite significant, but in the long run, the supply chains have been restructured, to get goods into the U.S. through multiple channels. I think in the medium run, inflation will increase, but not so much because of tariffs.
I appreciate your insights today. Look forward to continuing this conversation another day. Hei Wai Tang, economics professor and director of Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong. On to another news now. Huawei has unveiled its first smartphone equipped with a fully homegrown operating system. It is a major turnaround for the Chinese tech giant, which saw its wings clipped by U.S. sanctions and has been pivoting to self-reliance amid a tech war between Beijing and Washington. CNA's Tan Se-hui reports.
It's the newest addition to Huawei's smartphone series unveiled with much fanfare. The Mate 70 boasts new AI-driven features like an upgraded AI sensor and higher density battery. The new series is set to be equipped by Huawei's first fully self-developed operating system, the Harmony OS Next, and the most advanced domestically made chip. At a launch event in Shenzhen, Huawei Executive Director Richard Yu called the new Mate 70 its most powerful phone yet.
I think other brands should be worried in terms of really upping their game. I think Huawei is trying to do its best to get around the international sanctions that is affecting its products. So before the US sanctions hit Huawei, it was the largest global supplier of mobile phones around the world. With the sanctions, it has now developed its own Harmony OS, and it's now developing its own chips. So with these new products, it's hoped that Huawei will be able to match up with international brands using the available resources that it has.
Huawei is counting on China's massive domestic market as it seeks to overcome US sanctions to achieve technological self-reliance.
因为它自己本身国产的芯片嘛，要支持下嘛，然后它的新出的那个系统，我可能更喜欢一点吧，鸿蒙系统。
华为的系统，我觉得相比于苹果还是比较多样化的，而且它的各种给你功能配置的确实是非常不错。
But consumers may be more price sensitive this time around, with domestic consumption remaining weak amid sluggish economic growth.
There are no long queues outside Huawei's flagship store in Beijing. That's because most potential customers have already placed their orders online, and according to Huawei's official website, more than 3 million people have already pre-booked their Mate 70 in the 1 week that reservations open.
Huawei launched Harmony OS 5 years ago. The company said the operating system is currently used by more than 1 billion devices, with more than 6 million registered developers. Its latest version has 15,000 so-called native apps, including messaging app WeChat and e-commerce platform Taobao. While these native apps are fully independent of Google's Android system, there have been complaints about gaps in their functionalities.
Unfortunately, when we talk about a smartphone, the ecosystem is important. Right? We need to be able to use as many apps as possible in the market. So with the Harmony OS system, there are quite a lot of apps which cannot be used in there. For example, WhatsApp, for example, some of the Microsoft or some of the business sort of apps that are in there. So that would definitely be a hindrance when Huawei tries to go into the international market.
The magic number is 100,000. That's the number of apps the tech giant is aiming for in the next 6 months to a year, as it sets its sights on creating a new standard for the smartphone ecosystem. Tan Se-hui, CNA, Beijing.
And we'll bring you more insights on Huawei's Mate 70 and the new smartphone operating system when we speak with IDC's Will Wong in just a moment. And it's not just Huawei pushing on to achieve self-reliance in the chip technology. Xiaomi, too. It is said to be preparing a self-designed mobile processor for its upcoming smartphones. Bloomberg reports the Chinese firm will begin mass production of the chip as soon as next year as it looks to reduce its dependence on foreign suppliers, including Qualcomm and MediaTek. Experts say the urgency with which Xiaomi is aiming to develop a processor underscores Beijing's attempt to develop its tech sector in the face of strict sanctions from the West. And Chinese officials have also repeatedly asked local firms to reduce their reliance on overseas tech as much as possible. For Xiaomi, it marks a foray into yet another cutting-edge field in a year where it also invested heavily in electric vehicles. The advance could boost the company's efforts towards making smarter and better connected EVs. But experts warn developing in-house chip-making expertise comes with its own challenges. And Japan services producer prices for the month of October have signaled that companies are passing on rising labor costs to business customers at the fastest pace in more than 3 decades. The index for services with a higher labor cost ratio rose 3.3% on year in October. And this increase is the fastest since 1992, excluding the impact of the 2014 sales tax hike. Overall, the figure rose 2.9% on year in October, accelerating from a 2.8% gain in September. And the data supports the Bank of Japan's view that rising wages are encouraging firms to raise their prices. It also bolsters the prospect that the central bank will raise interest rates pretty soon. Customer and consumer inflation figures out last week, also developing in line with the BOJ's projections. But there are worries that uncertainty surrounding Donald Trump's return to the White House may cloud Japan's economic outlook. The BOJ will be meeting to decide on interest rate hikes or not next month. And that's all I have in business. Oteli, it's back to you.
Thanks so very much for that. Appreciated. Olivia Mazuki there. Right, Sweden is asking a Chinese vessel to move into its waters to better help facilitate the Nordic country's investigation into the recent cutting of undersea cables in the Baltic Sea. Well, Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson says that his country had contacted bulk carrier Yipeng 3 and Beijing on the issue. He stresses that the request was not an accusation of any kind. The Yipeng 3 remains anchored in international waters located inside Denmark's exclusive economic zone. Well, Denmark's military said last week it has been staying close to the Chinese vessel, without mentioning the cable breaches or saying why it's doing so. China's foreign ministry has denied any responsibility in the matter, saying that it's maintaining communication with all parties involved. The sections of 2 fiber optic data telecommunication cables in the Baltic Sea were severed more than a week ago. According to ship tracking sites, the Yipeng 3 sailed over the cables located in Swedish territorial waters around the time they were severed. Well, there has been no indication that the vessel was involved in the incidents, with traffic data also showing other ships in the area. Well, time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, we'll be speaking with our correspondent Lee Hsien Loong, who will bring us more on the meeting between Singapore's senior minister Lee Hsien Loong and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Plus, a unanimous decision from Hong Kong's top court upholding housing rights for married same-sex couples. You're watching East Asia tonight. Well, China says that it is open to dialogue with the U.S. as incoming President Donald Trump pledges an extra 10% tariff on Chinese goods to stop the flow of illegal drugs into America. The importance of bilateral cooperation amid international uncertainty, highlighted at a meeting in Beijing between Singapore's senior minister Lee Hsien Loong and China's President Xi Jinping. And China's Huawei advancing its comeback in premium smartphones, launching its Mate 70 series with a fully homegrown operating system as the tech giant grows despite heavy U.S. sanctions. And for more insights on Huawei's developments, we are joined now by Will Wong, Senior Research Manager at International Data Corporation or rather IDC in Singapore, and he specializes in the smartphone market in China. Well, thanks so much, Will, for joining us this evening. First, help us understand this, right? How do you think, in a nutshell, this rapid development of Huawei's new phone, as well as its operating system, reflects the company's, I guess, overall pace of technological advancement?
Yeah, so if we look at the new products, we can see that Huawei again stay very competitive in terms of hardware, software, and AI capabilities. And of course, to answer that question, there are two driving forces for that. So first one is, of course, Huawei has a very strong R&D fundamentals. And second force is that China itself has a very comprehensive supply chain and technology ecosystems. So what we can see is that Huawei is unlikely to achieve that if it does not operate in China. Yeah, of course, the OS. So Harmony OS next is another thing that we need to look at. We still see a very good potential for that because it's not only about Huawei has a very, very good brand name locally, but also we see that it put a lot of effort and incentive to attract those developers to join its ecosystems. So we still see a very good improvements and advancements, and thanks to its own R&D fundamentals and a comprehensive supply chain and technology ecosystem in China itself.
So this third operating system, like Huawei's Harmony OS, which appears to be a necessary development in the tech industry. But I'm wondering, are there, help us understand firstly, what are the potential benefits and possible drawbacks for the consumers and the developers?
Yeah, so for Huawei itself, it's a necessary thing because for Huawei itself, you need to get more revenue sources as well. So if we look at the global smartphone market, we only expect the next 1 to 3 years, it only grow by nearly 2% in terms of shipments. So for Huawei itself, it needs this kind of software revenue to have extra revenue, extra resources in order to push for its future development. So for consumer themselves, it's necessary as well. So because the OS right now is mainly focusing on China. So for China themselves, this OS was still pretty good for the consumers. There's no very key challenges for the consumers. And for consumers themselves, we see that it's necessary as well because this kind of competitions will drive innovations. And innovations potentially will bring more and better products and services to the consumers as well.
So in a nutshell, how does it compare to, I guess, the Android and the iOS in terms of, security, in terms of user experience, and just the app ecosystem?
In China itself, we don't see a key issue for that. Yeah, so we don't see a key issue for that because Huawei, they have very good fundamentals, as I mentioned. So when they develop this kind of OS, they know how to address those issues. And if we want to look at it, actually, it has its own selling point as well. So it has the atomic service, which allows users to actually access the app without installations. So it helps to differentiate itself. But it comes to overseas, outside of China, of course, it has a difference because outside of China, consumers still really largely depends on like Google services and also the apps within iOS.
That's right, and you talk about this atomic service. Then how does it, I guess, square, with these other Chinese tech companies like Xiaomi and Oppo?
Yeah, for Xiaomi and Oppo, they are still partnering with like Google globally themselves because they know the risk of these like US-China tensions, but they also know that it's very important to like really partner with Google. Yeah, so of course they are building their own software in order to really attract and build their own selling points. But I would say that it's still pretty within the Android ecosystems for Xiaomi and Oppo and other Android vendors.
So going forward, right, Will, all this, the US chip and all these ongoing tech sanctions, right, do you think that will impact, Huawei's ability, over time to innovate and compete in the global market? Because we have seen with this latest Harmony OS, it doesn't seem to have made any impact. So what do you read from here on?
Yes, what I see is that it will only speed up the self-reliance effort in China and also for Huawei itself, because we can see that after the US ban on Huawei, it still can have advancements in terms of hardware, in terms of software. So when we are seeing current situations, it will only speed up the whole advancement and improvement and developments. And Huawei can do that. And for China itself, because of its supply chains and technology ecosystems, it can help Huawei to achieve that as well. It will only speed up things.
Right, appreciate your time and thoughts there. Will Wong from IDC. More now on Singapore Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong's visit to China. Well, he says that cooperation between the two countries is especially valuable amid a more uncertain and troubled international environment. Well, SM Lee met Chinese President Xi Jinping just a short while ago, and the two leaders were at the Diaoyutai State Guest House in Beijing. This comes as part of a 6-day visit to China, which began on Sunday. And for more, we are joined now by CNA's Olivia Xiong from Beijing. Olivia, so you were in the room when this highly anticipated meeting between SM Lee and President Xi took place. What was the key message from both sides?
I'll tell you what, I can tell you it's pretty cold out here in Beijing today, but inside that room, both leaders affirming the warm ties between the two countries. And it's not just a meeting between these two gentlemen, but President Xi also hosting Senior Minister Lee to a dinner tonight as well. In opening remarks during their sit-down, Senior Minister Lee noted how ties between the two countries have continued to strengthen since they upgraded bilateral relations last year. Now, that took place when Mr. Lee last visited China back in March last year, where he also met Mr. Xi. Back then, he's still serving as Singapore's Prime Minister. Now, citing examples of how bilateral ties have grown, Mr. Lee said that he was glad that Mr. Xi has met his successor, Singapore's new Prime Minister, Lawrence Wong, just a few weeks ago on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Peru. Singapore and China also holding their bilateral APEC forum that they hold yearly, the Joint Council for Bilateral Cooperation in Singapore, where 25 agreements were signed, including a further upgrade to the Singapore-China Free Trade Agreement set to take effect at the end of the year. Now, Mr. Lee said such cooperation is, quote, especially valuable amid greater uncertainties in the world. Now, Mr. Lee didn't mention any specific countries here, but we do know about that troubled relationship between China and the United States. Have a listen.
Tensions between major powers have intensified. Countries are emphasizing national security, supply chain resilience, instead of economic integration and international multilateral cooperation. And it makes it all the more important in such an environment for like-minded countries, big ones as well as small ones, to work together to develop our cooperation to the best of our ability for the benefits of our peoples.
Now, Mr. Lee is no stranger to China, having visited the country 14 times as Singapore's Prime Minister. And this is something that President Xi alluded to, calling Mr. Lee an old and good friend of China. Now, with Mr. Lee handing over the reins of Prime Minister earlier this year, Mr. Xi also said that China believes that Singapore will be able to continue its momentum of prosperity and development.
去年我们共同确立了中心全方位、高质量的前瞻性伙伴关系，为两国关系发展明确了战略方向。明年是中心建交35周年，要进一步加强发展战略对接，深化各领域合作，为两国人民带来更多的福祉，为地区和平和繁荣做出新的更大的贡献。
So, Olivia, I believe that Mr. Lee, he also met China's top political advisory body chairman, Wang Huning. Give us the key aspects of that meeting.
Well, I tell you, Mr. Wang is China's number 4 ranking official, and Mr. Lee and Mr. Wang met earlier in the day at the Great Hall of the People here in Beijing. They also met during Mr. Lee's trip in March last year when he was Prime Minister. Now, Mr. Lee said that he's happy to see the continued high level of exchanges between the two sides continue with strong momentum. Have a listen.
I was here last year in March, and we had a good meeting together. Since then, our bilateral relations have continued to strengthen and deepen, and I'm looking forward to catching up with old friends and to learning about recent developments in China on this visit. Our relations are in very good shape.
Now, with the upgrade in bilateral relations between Singapore and China last year, Mr. Lee said that reflected mutual cooperation to deepen and refresh working together in both traditional and emerging areas. For example, with regard to people-to-people ties, both sides started a mutual visa-free exemption program earlier this year for travelers. On his part, Mr. Wang also saying that he believes that Mr. Lee will continue to play a key role as senior minister in promoting friendship between the two countries. This also coming as Singapore and China get ready to mark 35 years of diplomatic relations next year.
中方愿意以此为契机，同新方保持密切的高层交往，加强各领域的务实合作，增进人民友好情谊，推动中新关系取得新进展，为两国各自国家建设提供助力，为地区和平稳定与发展繁荣贡献积极力量。
Now, Beijing is the second of 3 cities that Mr. Lee is visiting on this trip, which is his first as senior minister. He came from Suzhou, which marked the 30th anniversary of the Suzhou Industrial Park, the first government-to-government project between the two countries, just yesterday. Also, next, Mr. Lee will be headed to Shanghai, where he's expected to meet Shanghai's party chief, Chen Zining, as well as Singaporeans living in the city. And we'll be bringing you more reports in the coming days. Ateli.
Good to know and looking forward to that. And before your teeth start to chatter, Olivia, I'm going to leave you to run indoors to warm up. Thanks so very much, Olivia. Now, Hong Kong's top court has upheld public housing and inheritance rights for married same-sex couples. 5 judges, in a unanimous decision, rejected the government's arguments that same-sex and opposite-sex couples were not comparable in terms of their rights to public housing. Chief Judge Andrew Chung acknowledged the limited resources officials work with, but said it is necessary to allocate social welfare benefits on a rational basis that is free from discrimination. The government's challenge came after a lower court upheld the rights of 3 same-sex couples who married overseas. Last year, Hong Kong's top court ruled against same-sex marriage, but acknowledged the need for alternative legal frameworks for same-sex couples to access what it calls basic social requirements. Well, the government was given 2 years to produce the framework.
The court made it very clear that same-sex marriage is just the same as heterosexual marriage. So I think the next question is then, if they are the same, why we should treat them differently? So let's hope that the government will take note of the judgment and finally do their work and come up with something comprehensive. As I have just said, the best solution is marriage equality.
An AFP investigation reveals a wave of disinformation centered around tensions in the disputed South China Sea, using apparently AI-generated content and posted on Facebook and YouTube for profit. The AFP reports found at least 25 Facebook pages that misrepresented old videos of army operations, falsely claiming the U.S. is helping ally Manila prepare for war. The network's associated pages and channels have a combined following of more than 10 million people. The pages appear to be American, with most followers in the U.S., even though it's based in the Thai capital, Bangkok. The network manager confirmed to AFP that they earn through ad placements on clickbait content, with each article generating between $20 to $70 based on reviews. Now, at least one post altered an old photo of British soldiers in Afghanistan and claimed that the U.S. was sending thousands of American troops to the Philippines. Well, Well, an analyst says revenue-making disinformation campaigns have emerged as a big industry in Southeast Asia, where labor is relatively cheap. Experts, however, stressed that though content often mirrors China's position on the dispute, there is no evidence that the network is directly linked to Beijing or other state actors. Coming up on East Asia tonight, volunteers in Beijing race against the clock in a frantic search for missing elderly who are suffering from dementia. You're watching East Asia tonight. Japan's space agency has halted an engine combustion test of one of its rockets after a fire broke out at the test site. The Epsilon S rocket carries a solid fuel engine and was set for a debut flight by next March. The explosion took place at the Tanegashima Space Center in the remote Kagoshima region. And Japan's space agency said there were no injuries reported and the cause is under investigation. Well, towering balls of fire and white fumes were seen rising from the rocket test site. Well, reports say that there was a large explosion, after which something on fire was seen flying towards the sea. The last engine test of the Epsilon S rocket was in July last year. It had failed as well as another test in 2022. The failures have led to months of investigation that caused delays in Japan's national space missions and satellite launch plans. The Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency has a larger flagship rocket called H3, built by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. Well, that rocket succeeded in 3 flights this year, launching Japanese satellites and winning orders from a French satellite company. We turn to Myanmar, where a key ethnic rebel group says it is ready for talks with the military government to end more than a year of renewed fighting that has ravaged the border area with China. The Ta'ang National Liberation Army, or TNLA, is part of 2 other allied rebel groups that launched an offensive against the military more than a year ago. The TNLA says that while it is ready for talks, they reserve the right to defend themselves and will not cede territory. In September, Myanmar's military government made an unprecedented offer for talks, a bid that was dismissed then by the rebel groups. Analysts believe that China is pressuring the TNLA and its allies to halt their operations. China is a major ally and arms supplier to Myanmar's military government, but also maintains ties with ethnic armed groups battling for autonomy near its border. It has repeatedly called for fighting to stop in the northern Shan state, a key link in its $1 trillion Belt and Road initiative. Well, the latest development comes amid reports that Rohingya armed groups are recruiting refugees from Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh to fight alongside the Myanmar military against other rebel groups. China has roughly 15 million people over the age of 60 living with dementia, of which 10 million people suffer from Alzheimer's disease, the most common form of dementia. And as the number of disease sufferers increases, those losing their way have also spiked. Well, CNA's No Ordinary Rescue delves into how a rescue service in Beijing helps families find their missing loved ones.
红梅姐在对部呢。她是15号的时候晚上0点左右吧，她等于把车停在了16号0点。16号的凌晨，对，16号凌晨左右，然后她把车停在了这个4环主路望河桥匝道出口那儿，等于就是这个拖车公司是接到报警电话去拖的车，但是呢车上已经没有人了，等于他已经弃了车了。
车开到没油，这老人这脑子有人呢。现在那个你去望公桥那儿去那个望河公园那边那个那边，然后他就上劲松交通队查，就上。 钱呀、身份证啥都没有，
什么都没有。对。
晚上我是想从那派出所查监控，看那个桥那儿的监控，看他什么时候汽车走的，他不就看看人影就好办了吗？那16号、17号、18号了，也1天多2天了。
我们这个队长群里头的人就会自己报名，说我有时间。那么谁先第一个说出有时间来，我们就指派他第一个跟家属联系。然后拿着我们给这个家属的签的这个意见表，就是我们向家属承诺，不以任何方式、任何形式收取家属的任何费用。
老人走失的话，我们第一确定就是什么时候走失的，我们要具体到点、分，从哪走失的，有没有报警，对，派出所是怎么回复的。这个其实是特别重要。
那个走失地点，你们能不能给修改一下？修改成望河桥。他车在那儿，人可能最后一点他从那儿下车的呀。
那么一般的，你比如说像山地救援，那个山就在那儿，然后你把山走熟，山上哪儿有危险，哪儿会出危险，哪儿有手机信号，其实很容易都查出来。而这个城市救援呢，这个老人去哪儿了，没有任何人能说清楚，这是要用监控来排老人真正的状态。
帮找一个走失的老人。
走失的老人是吗？
对，16号。对。你想看看你们外侧的监控信号，就是马路上的。
这个暂时不太方便。
那我们是不是得让那个派出所？
就是机场
对，现在这是一个65岁的一个老人，6号以上。
问一下领导。
老爷子呢，说实话非常睿智。在队里头呢，经常都是有的时候，大家有什么心事了，包括我们在救援过程当中有的时候不顺的坚持，都是老爷子。
那应该不是，应该不是。
你刚才拍那个特别不清楚，我就看不清。
那你看这儿，这儿。
You can catch the complete No Ordinary Rescue episode In Search of Missing Elderly on YouTube, Me Watch, and on our website, cna.asia. On that note, it's time to wrap up East Asia Tonight this Tuesday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.